Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this panel, and thank you for being here at MoCA today. I'm really surprised and excited to see how much interest there is in our professional development programming. And I should note that our professional development programming is sponsored by SVA, the School of Visual Arts Continuing Education Department, and of course, SVA is also hosting our programming here today. So hi, my name is Bill Kartalopoulos. I'm the program director here for the MoCA Festival. I do a lot of other work in comics, including teaching and editing. And today we're very, very fortunate to be joined by editors from 4 of the most, I think, consequential book publishers in the graphic novel area today. I'm not going to get into introductions now because I'm going to start out by talking a little bit with each of the panelists about their backgrounds. But for the moment, please join me in welcoming Robin Chapman from First Second Books, Tom Devlin from Warren Quarterly, Charlotte Greenbaum from Gateway, and Gary Black from Planet Rocket. So one of the reasons I wanted to bring people together and have a conversation as part of our professional development is because I think the larger book publishing industry has been in this kind of like really weird place for a few years now, and you've had like some interesting kinds of sales spikes with COVID, and then everyone being for unusual reasons really surprised when that didn't sustain beyond lockdown, and stuff happening with proposed mergers, and my favorite character in book publishing, Judge Pan, kind of dispensing some interesting witticisms about ways in which this book publishing as an industry is sort of confusing and offers a lot of double talk, sometimes talking about itself like it's an art form when that's convenient, and talking about itself like a business when that's convenient. So I just thought it would be interesting to bring sort of everyone together. Also, too, because we're in this odd place where, it's been more than 20 years, really, since graphic novels have been, I would say, like really fully established as a kind of consistent part of the book publishing industry, with pretty, what seems like still a pretty stable permanent footprint in bookstores and libraries. And yet, of course, what that section looks like today is very different from what it looked like today in 2004, when it was inaugurated. And anyway, so there are a lot of issues, but I think one of the things that I think is really interesting about all 4 of the panelists who we have here today is that many of them came to their roles having gone through a lot of different kinds of experiences relating to comics publishing, including very small press publishing. And that's certainly true of the first person, going alphabetically, I wanted to talk to for a few minutes, and that's Robin Chapman. And Robin, I remember the first time I met you, and you probably, I can't imagine why you would remember this. I was just one of, I don't know how many people in the year 2000 in San Diego at the Comic-Con who bought a copy of this comic book from you. This was your Zarek-funded comic book Theater of the Meek. And you've since then drawn a bunch of other comics. And you also maintain a small press publishing imprint called Paper Rocket Mini Comics that publishes mini comics. Among the books you've done, an anthology too of Ariel Borto's Deep Girl comics, and I think your most recent book is American Cult, but I could be wrong. Maybe there's one more recent.
Yeah, most recent book, a lot of minis coming out.
Okay, great, excellent. But so on the one hand, you've kind of really come up from like the small press trenches, and you're still there. I mean, you're exhibiting this weekend as Paper Rocket. You're not exhibiting as First Second and imprint of Macmillan. But your day job is you're an editor at First Second and imprint of Macmillan. So first of all, I wanted to, when did you start working at First Second?
I guess full time 7 years ago.
Okay.
And did some part time and like freelance for them before.
Okay. And your title now is editor. Is that the title you came in with?
No, I came in as an assistant, like most folks do, into the editing side of publishing as an editorial assistant, and then over the years you level up, and so yeah, right now like I was this editorial assistant, assistant editor, associate editor, editor.
Okay.
And then there's stuff above that, of course.
Okay, congratulations. So I guess one thing I want to ask you is, I guess I want to ask you a little bit about that transition going into corporate publishing with a strong background in small press. I mean, because you've done a lot of things in comics before. You've been up at CCS working there for a while, and you worked in a variety of capacities. I know you were at Universe for a little bit, or
Graphic Universe, yeah.
Yeah, before that for a little bit, and then you went to First Second. But one thing I'm kind of wondering is, coming from the small press, which is super idealistic, and also super broke usually, what were some of the hardest maybe lessons that you had to wrap your head around going into a corporate publishing environment?
I have to think for a second. That's a hard question. Well, one thing is it takes so long to print and to publish a book. If you're like, I was folding and stapling last night, so I printed a mini comic basically yesterday, and it's on the table today. And with a large publisher, big publishing house, especially if they're printing overseas, that's not possible. Like, we were just talking about what we're working on now, and we're getting ready to put our Fall 24 books in production. Not Fall 23, Fall 24. And so we need that much time just to do the copy editing, the design, the proofing, and then sending it to the printer. And the printing takes not too long, but the shipping back. And we do most of our color printing, or really all of our color printing overseas, which I think is pretty common because it's so cheap. So we have to, comparatively, compared to printing domestically. Black and white is pretty cheap domestically, so we do a lot of our black and white domestically, but color, it's kind of not it's really difficult to make margin, as we call it, to make a profit when you're printing color domestically. So that's a big difference.
One thing I'm also kind of interested in too is, like, you kind of have these two different editorial roles. Like with Paper Rocket, you can do whatever you want to do. At First Second has a maybe more specific kind of aesthetic or maybe mission, that it has for itself, and certainly it has to operate in, and I think it's not, what you're really describing is overhead in a sense. It's like the overhead of time, but also the overhead of resources in order to function within that corporate publishing environment. And because there's so much overhead, they make different kinds of choices, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say,
go ahead, yeah.
There's a sense, and I'm sure this is true for all of you guys, of what a first, second book is. And sometimes we get submissions that are great, and I'm like, I can't wait to buy it, I love it, but it's not a first, second book. It's maybe it's a bit too indie, a bit too zany is sometimes a word I use, like the too avant-garde. Like, we're a publisher in a big house, and we're a more commercial publisher for sure compared to Paper Rocket, which is basically non-commercial, and I can just print whatever I feel like I want to.
Yeah, and that's a kind of interesting thing too, because like it's so interesting to see a publisher kind of evolve and then get to a point where it has a sort of center of gravity that it doesn't want to shake up too hard. Because I remember when First Second started, it seemed kind of all over the place, and there was a lot of international, I know you weren't there when they started, but I know that you were aware of what they were doing. Like, they had a lot of international stuff, like Joel Farr, Christophe Glenn, and they're doing Eddie Campbell books and all this kind of stuff. And then but the way it's developed, it's really moved a lot more towards young reader books, actual young reader books, young adult books. And these are just some of the recent and upcoming books. And even, frankly, the books, that are labeled as adult books are not, wouldn't be, they wouldn't like cause nobody would get arrested if a teenager were to read any of the things in their adult category. Let's put it that way. There's no grooming going on here. to use the popular buzzword of the book banners of the day. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, do you have a sense that there's a kind of, like, what a first, second book is in a way that has to do with maybe age appropriateness or an audience that you've developed that you don't want to alienate, or how do you sense, what's your sense of what that means of what a first, second book is?
I mean, part of it has to be, like, we are trying to make a profit. like there's and some areas of the market are more challenging than others. Mm-hmm. Children's publishing, especially middle grade graphic novel publishing, it's a pretty good market. Like it has been for years. Like we make most of our money there, to be honest. Our adult publishing is a harder nut to crack. So especially for like our adult books, we have to be really choosy, just because it's just so hard to make a profit. Like for an adult book to earn out or make a profit, it's very challenging. So sometimes it's about the audience. We're like, oh, this book just doesn't have a big enough audience for us. Like it's too niche. Yeah, so that's part of it. And I guess it's hard to define the art style that, not that there's even one first, second art style, but I think there's a general sense of like sort of a polished commercial style, especially in the middle grade stuff that like fits well at first, second, and then there's some styles that are just more like underground or more avant-garde or scribbly or whatever you want to call it, that wouldn't quite fit in with the rest of our books.
Tom, I wanted to talk to you both about your career and Drawn and Quarterly sort of arc and how those things have kind of intersected too, because Drawn and Quarterly has started out also itself as a very small press project. I mean, initially it was just an anthology magazine, kind of in the mode of like Raw or Weirdo or whatever. But now it's really a significant book publisher. And I think what Drawn and Quarterly has aspired to is continuing to offer authors the benefits of being within an independent publishing house while being able to hopefully compete with other more corporate book publishers at a pretty high level. And that includes, for example, Ducks by Kate Beaton, which has recently, garnered all kinds of accolades. It was on Obama's, best books of the year, and recently won the Canada Reads competition, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, I know, it's kind of a weird thing, and I found out that Kate's book won as I was getting on the airplane to come here, and I was like, I am leaving Canada where everybody's really excited about this. And I just like, stepped onto the plane and read the company Slack that she won, and I was like, nobody will care. But it's a televised event, so for a week it's on TV where these panelists are debating and championing books that they've chosen. And there's just 5 books at the start, and they vote a book off each day, so it goes over for the whole week. On Canadian television, people like arguing about books, mostly just saying nice things about books, and then finally, they crown a champion. Okay. And we got orders of like our distributor ordered 4,000 copies of the book, like within minutes of the show ending, which anybody here knows is 4,000 copies of a book is very good, especially if that book has been out for months.
Yeah.
I mean, we all publish many books that don't sell 4,000 copies at all. So it's a very big deal.
Yeah, sure.
In Canada.
Yeah. Well, no, and too, I mean, that you're able to function at that level, I think is affirming also that you're able to have those books ready to go.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a very tricky thing, of course, because like Robin pointed out, it's months of planning to have a book ready. So you're like a year out on some of these things, saying, I guess we're going to print a third printing, hoping that something happens like this in 6 months. Which is a very big gamble.
Yeah. And your background is also in the small press. I mean, when I first became aware of you, Tom, you were the editor-in-chief of your own publishing house, Tidewater Books. This is a picture of you in the middle with Ron Ricci and Jordan Crane. And you ran for quite a few years a small press publishing house, Tidewater Books. And I mean, the sort of like legend of High Water, if I may, is that you were, I mean, it was like a lot of other indie projects in the 90s that involved just kind of like hand-to-mouth living and maxed out credit cards.
Yeah,
And
that's absolutely correct.
yeah, sure. So
Bounce checks, all of that stuff.
yeah, but what you were doing was also really kind of astonishing because aesthetically you had a sensibility that even with all the other good independent publishing that was happening at that time at Fantagraphics and Drawn Quarterly and elsewhere was distinct from what other people were doing. You seemed to be the only person who was like paying attention to the New England scene that included Fort Thunder and so on. And then also on top of that, you were, I think, very early in almost exclusively publishing books, even at a time when Fantagraphics and Drawn Quarterly were still doing, a certain kind of mix of paper, staple-bound pamphlets and books. And you were, I think, I can remember like 2 comic books that you published, maybe. Like Boys and Reggie 12.
And I distributed. Yeah, I did too. But it was, I worked in a comic store at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would see all this stuff, and it was really kind of like a big kind of like zine and mini comic revolution at the time. And I was the guy standing at the counter who would buy them as people brought them in. So I was in a perfect position to see something new first. And I also knew like Fantagraphics was like very established and in my mind huge. Like just just I know. Well, I know better now, Gary, but at the time. And the same with Drawn and Quarterly. Like Drawn and Quarterly hadn't been around that long really, but it seemed like it had, been. And I've been following them, almost from the beginning of the publishing houses. And I just thought like, oh, this stuff they're not going to publish this stuff. It doesn't fit with them, so I'll just do it. It was really just like, I guess I'll do it. I didn't have any real bigger thoughts than that.
Well, what made you focus on books specifically?
That I did think like it's time for graphic novels. I mean, I wasn't ahead. It was Chris and Gary were thinking this. They knew this right then. But we were also tied to Diamond Comics distributors, and they would pay you right away. Like, is it 90 days? It was fast.
Oh, it was 30 days.
30 days. It was 30 days. So, yeah, I mean, in the book market, it's like 120, and part of it's held back, but Diamond would just give you the cash 30 days after you delivered the books.
And those are
non-returnable.
Non-returnable. So you get a check, and that's your check, and you can do stuff with that money. So it was so they really, we were all very dependent on Diamond.
What you could do with that money is pay the printer.
Yeah, I mean, you would just pay
do much else.
You would pay for the next thing, and like
what you want to do is pay the printer.
Yeah. So I kind of thought like, well, the next thing is to get into bookstores and have successes. And I was certain that I would make a book and it would be like a big success, and then that would make everything work. It wouldn't necessarily be the first book, but it might be the 5th. And I was wrong, by the way. None of them were big successes, and eventually I went out of business. But I was also a very bad businessman.
Yeah, but they were creative successes.
Yeah, I mean they were. They were well reviewed critically. People loved them. And then what Gary and Chris knew, eventually people came around. I mean, Fun Home I think really helped convince a lot of people that there was something going on. I mean, Fantagraphics had hundreds of books by then that would convince you and I and many people in this room, but it hadn't broken through.
Yeah. And you were doing some kind of interesting things too in terms of choosing some unusual paper stocks and formats, and using you don't get a sense of it from the slide, but using Pantone colors and stuff like that. I mean, some stuff that even still feels a little, certainly compared to what you see in mass market publishing, still looks very kind of a little exotic in some
Yeah,
regards.
I worked in a comic store, and it was right next to this huge bookstore. And so on my break, I would go to the bookstore and I would just look at books.
Mhm.
And I wasn't a designer or anything, and it's really apparent in some of those covers. But so I just went and looked for ideas, and once you start looking at a bunch of things and you start looking at art books, you see all these like great ideas that people had for catching your eye.
Mhm.
So I just used that. I was just determined to use like those tricks,
Mhm. Mhm.
But I wanted to treat each object, like each book as like its own, object. It deserved respect.
Yeah.
And comics was totally like from a world of no respect, like
Rodney Dangerfield.
yeah, they were just flimsy pamphlets that you threw away after you read them,
Mhm.
or maybe slipped them into a box and put them in a closet.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and well, I mean, you left behind, I mean, a lot of books that inspired a lot of people for sure, but you also did join Drawn and Quarterly at a kind of crucial moment, like in 2004, in fact, Drawn and Quarterly and some other publishers, including Fantagraphics, got together and sort of petitioned, as I understand it, for the creation of this new BISAC category of the graphic novel. And Art Spiegelman was involved too in helping with this lobbying effort. And Peggy was there too when she was at DC Comics still. So in 2003, I guess it was rather, it was kind of officially like enshrined in the book publishing industry that the graphic novel is a category and it has these subdivisions, manga, superhero, this, that, the other thing. And that was like right before Peggy joined Drawn and Quarterly. Peggy Burns was a publicist at DC, joined Drawn and Quarterly, and is also your partner. And you went along to Montreal as well, and became eventually executive editor at Drawn and Quarterly, and Peggy is now the publisher.
Yeah.
And so you were kind of at Drawn and Quarterly, like at that moment when it was like, okay, we're really for real getting into bookstore distribution, and I don't know, like it felt like a kind of, and I mean, Gary can maybe speak to this moment too, but it felt like a kind of leveling up moment where like you switched the distribution to FSG and Fantagraphics, gets Norton, as the distributor and so forth, so you're still independent, but you're functioning through the same distribution channels as these large corporate publishers and having to work on their schedules.
Yeah,
and do all these
that was
things.
huge for us. I mean, it for both of us, made a really big deal. It was easy to get in. I mean, easy. It wasn't that easy, but we were getting into bookstores in a way that we hadn't with like our smaller, like independent, or just doing it ourselves. Because that's impossible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't just call up bookstores and get your books in. You need a distributor. And we did both around the same time get very, big, well-regarded distributors that could start carrying our books. And they wouldn't have taken us much before that, so it was the timing. There's a reason that it's almost like the same year that we both do that, right?
Yeah. I mean, we were trying to get our books into bookstores for 15 years prior to this.
Yeah.
I'd go to that, but we were going through smaller distributors into bookstores, and it was like beating your head against a brick wall.
Yeah, they just couldn't really move many of your books.
Well, as I remember, there was some small distributor that had gone out of business owing a lot of.
LPC, did
LPC,
you guys have?
No, it wasn't
No.
BC. It was. I do know the distributor you're talking about. Yeah, they went out of business, owing us what was then a lot of money,
Yeah.
like bankrupt, inducing level money.
Yeah.
And that was around 2001 when they went out of business.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They were the last of many distributors that just got shot out from under us.
I had actually just printed 3 books simultaneously before they went out of business
As high water.
as Highwater,
Mhm.
and I couldn't afford to get those books released
Mhm.
because I just lost all distribution.
Mhm.
So eventually, those complete runs were pulped.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Stressful.
But they weren't comics, so don't worry. They were novels.
Oh.
No.
You didn't call
So
territory.
there's no great lost comics thing going on. Just some novels.
Interesting. All right, I'll have to dig into this later.
Yeah.
Well, and I kind of want to ask you sort of the same type of question, I guess, that I was asking Robin. what was maybe difficult for you to learn, or just what was something that you felt like you had to learn to kind of go from being, High Water Books as a sort of one-man band to being part of this publisher that had a kind of ambition to function in a more organized sort of way?
It wasn't that hard, but I was very aware of sort of what the Chris Oliveros editorial vision was, or what people expected from Drawn and Quarterly. So I knew there were things I wasn't just going to do, But I was there for a few months, and I just tried to kind of stay out of the way, and I just did production stuff. I just designed books, or laid out the books, and packed boxes, and all that kind of stuff. And then I kind of thought okay, I've been here long enough, and I think this fits, and that's when I brought Movement to Chris.
Yeah.
And of course, it was the kind of thing I was I don't know about.
The big thing that you kind of made your.
I was I don't know about this one, and but I probably agonized over it for a few days, and I said it to Chris, and Chris was oh yeah, that seems good. That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you had run, I think, a piece about the Movement comics in the issue of the Comics Journal that you guest edited.
Maybe, probably, I don't remember.
Okay. All right. And since then, since Movement, you've done a lot of stuff, and it's a little hard sometimes. There are a lot of folks working at Drawn and Quarterly now. I think it's 30 people or something.
Yeah, we have 2 bookstores, but it's
including
30
the bookshops.
people, so yeah.
What is there a particular part of the editorial mix that you feel like certainly the movement material, is there an area that you feel like is a place where you feel like you made a strong contribution?
I don't know. Chris and I were the acquisition editors, right, for a long time. So I brought Linda Berry on board, so that was kind of a big deal. And that one was really, I vividly remember sitting next to Chris. Our desks were really close together like this. We just talked to each other. And I said, who doesn't have books in print anymore? Who's a great cartoonist? It's the typical thing you just do. And then back then you could just get on Amazon and see books were out of print. Now you can't make sense of it. Books are, just being sold secondhand, so you can't really, but you'd look on there and you would just see this book is out of print. And all of her books were out of print. And I was like, Chris, this is crazy. Linda Berry's books are out of print. We got to ask Linda Berry. This is going to be a cash cow. And of course, as I now know, reprinting the old Linda Berry books, not really. They do well, but they're not a cash cow. But she had this book. She was I've been working on this book about creativity and stuff. And I was well, we asked her. We can't say this isn't what we want. We want comics. So she, that's what she turned in, and we said, we're publishing the book that Linda Berry gave us. And of course, then that was the best-selling book we ever published.
Yeah. That's interesting. Great. Okay, well, we'll get back to all that stuff. I'd like to talk to Charlotte a little bit. And Charlotte, to your benefit, this is the first time I'm meeting you, so I don't have any embarrassing photos of you.
I was have you been checking up on
comics
me?
and zines or anything. No, don't worry about it. But I do know a little bit about, this is a childhood picture of Abrams comic arts. The Abrams comic arts and imprinted Abrams that was started by Charlie Kochman, who'd done a lot of things successfully at Abrams, including the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books. And when you publish something like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, they let you have your own imprint, basically. And initially, Abrams comic arts. I remember when they started publishing stuff. Initially, my sense of them was that it was kind of almost an archival type of publisher. And Abrams is a funny publisher. Well, not funny, but what's interesting to me is we'll talk later. But no, what's interesting is I always thought of Abrams as an art book publisher, and it has that history. But actually now it's not exactly. You do a lot of prose, you do visual books, but there might be more home decoration books and things like that. That's my impression anyway of Abrams now versus because I've got dusty old art books books that have that old like triangle logo on the spine and stuff like that. But anyway, so my first thought was like, okay, so it's kind of like art books, except instead of, like Leonardo da Vinci, it's Harvey Kurtzman, as it should be. But I mean, he was also doing, some original graphic novels, and some of those, include like My Friend Dahmer in particular, actually took off and did quite well. So original graphic novels became part of what Abrams Comic Arts does, as well as the more kind of archival sort of stuff. And your background, I did, weeks of research on your LinkedIn. No, I'm just kidding. Minutes. No, but I know that you worked at Valiant before you went to Abrams, and before that you were a comics publisher that I had heard of called Double Tape. But
look at this tiny logo.
well, they're out of print, so all that's left is that little obby size thing. But no, but it sounds like with both Valiant and Double Tape in different ways, those are both comics publishers that were heavily involved in IP. With Double Tape, from what I understand, they were doing like George Romero comics and things like that. Is that true?
So Double Take was my first job in comics, and I worked for Bill Jemis. I don't know if anyone in this room knows Bill.
That's who that was.
Bill was my first boss, which was wild. We were working on Night of the Living Dead is not owned by anyone, and so we were making swipeable Night of the Living Dead inspired comics for your phone, but unfortunately we were trying to go horizontally when we have learned from Webtoon that people want to scroll up and down, and it was like,
unless it's Instagram.
I know, but it was just like, it was a little bit wrong, and it just didn't ever go anywhere. So that imprint lasted for like 3 years, and it was, our parent company was Take-Two Interactive, who owns Rockstar. So the original thought for that imprint had been to do video game comics, but it had not panned out the way they wanted it to, so we ended up trying to do this other thing, which also did not pan out, and that's okay.
That's all right.
Yeah.
But then you were at Valiant, which was originally started by Jim Shooter, but it's changed hands a few times since then. And it's, there are a few kind of brands like this in comics that just seem like they're sort of circulating from one venture capital firm to another as people try and figure out how to make another Marvel Cinematic Universe. But nevertheless, you were working at these publishers and gaining a lot of experience working with comics, and you ended up at Abrams. And I'm wondering, first of all, did you start out doing this kind of work because you were interested in comics, or did you have like a publishing career that ended up going through comics? How did that work?
Well, I have a degree in printmaking.
Okay.
So I started as a fine artist who had always loved comics. I was a big reader of manga. I was always in Tintin and every comic I could get my hands on at the library, which at the time was not that many. And I was finishing my printmaking degree and realizing I didn't really want to be a fine artist. I didn't want to be a working artist. And so I moved to New York, as one will, with no idea of what I wanted to do with my life. And my sister happened to work for Rockstar, and she knew that they were doing this comic book imprint, and so they hired me foolishly as an intern, and I just refused to leave. I think my original title was marketing, social media, publishing, and creative development intern, which is not a real job. Like, that's just someone who does everything. Mostly I got a lot of pizza for the team. But I would kind of stick my head in to various design meetings, editorial meetings, and offer my extremely unsolicited opinion. But no one else in that room had any art experience, had any background or training in fine arts, which you don't need necessarily, but I was able to contact artists and speak their language, and I also had some creative writing background, and it just kind of worked out to be sort of perfect for comics.
And I know, in Abrams now, it's still, as I understand Abrams Comics Arts rather, it's still kind of a mix between original graphic novels, as we see here, things like Joseph Smith and the Mormons and the Night Eaters and so on. And some more like pop culture oriented stuff, like the Topps collections, and there's like a Marvel kind of imprint now because
Marvel Arts.
Yes, as has been long predicted by oracles, Marvel is beginning to outsource publishing to other people.
It's true.
But you're also, from what I understand, you might be acquiring graphic novels, new graphic novels, and you're also the in-house editor for some imprints, right?
Yes.
And that includes Megascope, which is curated by John Jennings, who's also an artist, and Surely, another imprint curated by Mariko Tamaki, who many people probably know, is also a writer of many comics, including collaborations with their cousin Jillian Tamaki, who's an artist published, and Mariko and Jillian, of course, are working on a Drawn Quarterly book that's going to be out sometime later this year.
Yeah.
You know when?
September.
Okay. So anyway, but this is an imprint that platforms queer authors working on queer themes, and this is an imprint devoted to publishing work by people of color. Can you talk a little bit about your work with those imprints and how that fits into the overall mix of Abrams Comic Arts?
Sure. So when I started at Abrams 5 years ago, it was really their first move in just taking up more space in the graphic novel area. They were kind of looking to expand in every direction. I work on kids, I work on adult, I work on these things, and the ideas for Surely and Megascope were already in the works when I arrived, but it was the plan that I would be the in-house editor for these lines of graphic novels, which are under the umbrella of Comic Arts. And it's been really, we've kind of cooked up our own method because there wasn't really a plan in place beyond the idea of books becoming real, which is perfectly adequate idea. And then we had to put it into practice somehow. And so basically the way that I work with Mariko and John is they develop these projects, they seek out artists, they're at shows, talking to people, they're coming up with these ideas and they're sort of vetting them themselves, and then they bring me in to really serve as the editorial eyes on it, this person who has, you know, the ear of the company, and I'm in the room and I can say, oh, I love this, but you know, as Robin was saying, you get into these situations where you love a thing, but you know it's not gonna sell. So no matter how much you love it, you still have to deliver that news, which is very difficult. And we do a lot of back and forth to try to find projects that I think will be successful and will, you know, bring a lot of great attention and help build the brand. So I was really just helping them in that kind of capacity. As you know, John is an artist. John actually drew Kindred, which won an Eisner, New York Times #1 bestseller for the graphic novel list. He also drew Parable of the Sower, which won a Hugo. So Andrew, oh my God, John is an incredible artist, and he has learned a lot about the business side of things and the editorial side of things, because he also writes and does many of his own projects, but it's really been kind of bringing him in on the more logistical side of stuff. And for Mariko, as generally a writer, it was, you know, learning to how we were sourcing artists, because that's not something that she was totally used to, because she's paired with people or working with Jillian or various other things. And so it was really developing their sensibility for what could work at a commercial publisher, because Abrams is, you know, made its name for itself really on, no worries, like strong adult nonfiction titles like Durf's books, like Noah's books, and to kind of use these two imprints to bridge into fiction has been one of the main goals of having them, which has been amazing because we've been able to do really different books than the kind of original Abrams brand that you were describing, of the license thing, the sort of art book, the archival, and the nonfiction and memoir and biography stuff. So yeah, I've really sort of just served as their hands within the company and teaching them about the acquisition of these books. And then after really like the creative development process, I take care of the whole thing through the production and all the way to printing. And of course they're always involved, but really the in-house stuff with proprietary information, I handle all that.
Right, of course. Yeah. Okay, and I mean, I feel like I have a lot of questions to ask just based on that, but I do want to make sure we hear a little bit from everyone before we get into broader questions. Now, Gary, you've sort of been through
the mill.
You've been through so many kind of phases of comics publishing, and I feel like, you know, I mean, I think already just kind of like reminiscing about, the bankrupt, book distributor in like the late 90s, early 2000s or whatever. I mean, even that was a different place than where Fantagraphics started, and where you are now is another place altogether. I mean, when you started out as a fanzine publisher. I mean, you published fantastic fanzines.
Oh my
See
God.
there is a signature, and that's a Jim Steranko cover. And then, from then you kind of professionalized with the Comics Journal, which, was a more kind of,
Don't get ahead of yourself.
What's that?
Don't get ahead
Yeah,
of
well,
yourself.
which was kind of like a slicker, magazine of
Yeah.
comics news and criticism. And actually, I know, the Comics Journal still exists as a print entity. I do kind of miss this muckraking version of the journal, because I feel like it's needed now more than ever, that everything's been sort of corporatized. But, you went
That makes two of us.
from being a critic and a journalist to also being a publisher, together with Kim Thompson, publishing first Love and Rockets and other titles, that people don't remember as well, like Dalgota, and, but since then building Fantagraphics into being, one of the most historically significant comics publishers ever. And as you said, you were starting to publish books very early, even before, it was easy for a comics publisher to gain access into bookstore distribution. So there were, books like, collections of, 8 Ball and Hate and Love and Rockets and all kinds of, Jackson's books and all kinds of other stuff.
Yeah.
And now you're sort of in that place where you're almost exclusively a book publisher. I mean,
Yeah.
there's still some, occasional pamphlets, and the Hernandez brothers like having, I think, that, whatever it is, twice a year or 3 times a year deadline.
Three times a year.
Yeah, quarterly deadline,
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
They like the comic book format, and they deserve to have a comic book.
And other cartoonists do too. I mean,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
publish
I
a few
just for
floppies
a
a
few
year. Yeah.
people, it's kind of a fetish item for some people,
Yeah.
I think. But nevertheless, including everyone in this room probably, that's a lot of work here. But anyway, but now, you're this kind of like full service book publisher. I mean, how many books does Fantagraphics publish a year, Gary, approximately?
We publish between 80 and 100.
Yeah, that's about what I figured, and that's a lot. That's like,
You're telling me.
that's almost 2 books a week, That's
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
shocking,
Yeah.
and that's actually probably a good question. Like, for second, how many books a year would you say you publish?
45?
45. Okay, Abrams Comic Cards.
Like also maybe around 40.
And Drawing Quarterly.
Generally, it's 25.
Come on, you guys can do better than that.
25 to 30.
25 to 30.
It's
Yeah.
not a
I mean,
contest.
that's a heck of a model for independent publishing.
Yeah, I mean, on one level, it's terrifying. And saying that we publish 2 books a year, that makes it even more terrifying, because we literally have 2 deadlines a week that we have to. Yeah, I mean, our publishing. I don't know where you want me to start or what.
Oh, I don't know.
If there's a pending question, but
it just sort of came up as a real, and it's like, I actually didn't expect the difference to be quite so big, but it is actually a pretty, it kind of suggests a range of models of publishing, actually.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we think about publishing fewer books because it really is incredibly, it's just an incredible amount of work to do that. And then we look at our line and we say, which books would we not want to publish? And then it comes down to none. Because we publish Disney books, for example. We publish Karl Barks and Don Rosa, and European cartoonists. And it just so happens that Disney had some of the best cartoonists of the 20th century working for them. So those are great. We publish EC Comics from the 1950s, probably the best mainstream comics publisher in the history of comics. So we publish those. We publish newspaper strips like Prince Valiant and Pogo and Peanuts. We wouldn't want to not publish any of those. And then, of course, we have all of our original graphic novels, which we love for the contemporary vitality, which all of us there who acquire books thinks is an absolutely essential part of our publishing. So there's nothing we are currently publishing that we can't not publish. So we're stuck publishing that many books. Yeah, I mean, I can talk about
Sure.
distributing in the in the 80s and how hard it was to get graphic novels recognized and I can talk.
No, that's all
whatever
right.
you
No,
want me to-
I think we might loop around back to that. But I think what's interesting is like at a certain, I was wondering actually if you could sort of go back and think about, kind of that moment that we were just talking about, like when Drawn and Quarterly, got picked up by Norton. Oh, I'm sorry, FSG, and you got picked up by Norton as distributors. Were there like choices that you had to make? Did you really have to kind of think about like, all right, we're gonna have to change the way we do business in order to make this work? Because suddenly, I mean, they need catalog copy way in advance of like
Yeah.
Diamond.
But no, because you have to understand, we had distributors in the 90s. So
Mhm.
we had the process of being distributed in the retail trade down. It was just that we weren't being very well distributed in the trade, but the process was the same. We were first distributed in the book trade by a company, I don't even know if they're in business, but they were once like one of the biggest distribution companies in America, called Berkeley Books. And it's when Mao's came out, Watchmen came out, it was around 1987, and they smelled something in the air and they thought graphic novels would be hot. So they approached 5 publishers and we were one of them, and they wanted to distribute what had just started being called graphic novels. And to make a long story short, that did not work. Book buyers didn't know what graphic novels were, they didn't know what to do with them, they didn't know how to display them, and consumers didn't know what they were or how why they should buy them. So then in the 90s, all of us who were publishing in the 80s and the 90s thought that bookstore sales was the holy grail, and that's where we had to sell our books because we were sort of trapped in the comics market. And so we were all scrambling for distributors, and Fantagraphics must have gone through 3 or 4 distributors in the 90s. I'm not even sure I can remember their names.
Mhm.
But distributors go out of business. And distributors don't own anything. So when they go out of business, they owe you money, and you cannot get that money, so you're just stuck. That happened literally 3 or 4 times, and it happened somewhere around 2001, I believe. And I approached W.W. Norton, who is the oldest independent publisher in New York. And I approached them and gave them my pitch that comics were a legitimate literary medium and that we should be distributed by them next to other publishers. They were publishing like New Directions. And I told them that we were the comics equivalent of these publishers. And that was greeted with some degree of skepticism because even in 2001, comics were not regarded as, as a form of literature or art. And but I finally convinced them to take us on, take a chance, and they've been distributing us now for 21 years, and getting us and doing finally a good job of getting into bookstores. And that was, of course, helped because I think there was this confluence around 2001 or so, where Jimmy Corrigan came out, Black Hole came out, Fun Home came out. It was all around that.
David Boring.
It was within a year or so. David Boring came out, and
There's
suddenly there was
Sweeney's
a
and Masters of American Comics and all this stuff. There was like a 5-year
and
period where graphic novels were super hot.
and Mao's had already been there, and so there was suddenly a small critical mass that distributors and retailers could wrap their heads around.
Yeah. One thing that's kind of interesting to me is that, I'm like, kind of going back to that question, once you're operating at a higher level of, working with, not higher level in the sense of more esteemed, but just, maybe like a higher amount of overhead, more people involved, more outside entities involved in what you're doing. Certainly longer deadlines, like Robin was talking about. I think like on the one hand, when you publish something like The Complete Peanuts, and then you get involved with Disney, and it starts out with the Karl Barks, but you kind of expand to all the European artists who, are like super well known in like Finland, but like you're not, or Italy, but not as well known in the United States, publishing all this Disney stuff. Does that change at all the kinds of choices that you make? I think one difference is, unlike maybe, Robin and Charlotte, you don't have to convince a marketing department that a book is a good idea to publish. Like you're the publisher and you co-founded the company. But at the same time, I mean, I've noticed that there's like a Fantagraphics Underground imprint now that seems like a kind of like a sandbox to do more experimental things.
Yeah.
Whereas kind of like I kind of grew up in comics thinking of Fantagraphics as that sandbox. I mean, so does the existence of something like Fantagraphics Underground suggest something about the way Fantagraphics has changed as it's grown?
Yes and no. I mean, first of all, I mean, we publish, there are three of us at Fantagraphics who acquire books. And we acquire them, I would say, entirely on the basis of merit, on aesthetic merit, on what we like to publish and what we think are, constitute great books. And what we have always done for the last, 47 years is we juggle books that we need to publish or that somehow can make enough money to subsidize all the books that we want to publish that won't pay for themselves, and this is always a juggling act. So the fact that we have grown, although we've been pretty stable for about 10 years, I mean, we've been publishing this many books for probably at least 10 years or more. But no, we don't, I mean, the choices we make are probably the choices we've always made. I created the FU imprint, Fantagraphics Underground, and of course I love the acronym. I created that about 7 or 8 years ago because I was looking at work and I was getting submissions, but I was also just looking at work out there that was being published that there was no way in hell we could publish and put out into the book trade and make money because they were books that were going to sell 800 copies or 1,200 copies or something like that. And I knew that just looking at the work, and I was really upset that we couldn't publish this stuff. So I created an economic model that's probably like too boring and complicated to go into, where we could publish books and sell 600 or between 600 and 1,200 copies and not lose our shirts. We could essentially break even doing that. And it's an imprint I'm incredibly proud of because we can just publish this and this great uncommercial work that couldn't be published otherwise. Mm-hmm. And we published 70 books in the line up to now.
And my understanding is that part of that model, though, is that these books don't go through your book distributor. Is that true?
No, that's not true.
Oh, no.
Norton does distribute the books. Diamond obviously distributes the books to the comics market. I mean, part of the model is that they are not officially in our catalog. So that they don't cost us the enormous expense. Like when you have a catalog, you have a long marketing process, which everybody up here could, incredibly boringly go through. And we basically skip that process because you essentially want that partly because you're getting press for the book, and the press for the book is going to accelerate sales. Well, if I don't think I'm going to get press for a lot of press for a particular book, we can skip that process. We don't have to pay for the creating the catalog, and going through the whole process of getting it into book systems. But Norton still distributes it.
You're talking specifically about like kind of educating reps about this book, and this is our lead title, and that, and the other thing.
Yeah, mm-hmm. and providing them with all the advanced material and all the advanced promotional material that they will go out then and sell it. So these books are not essentially sold in the book trade, but they're available in the book trade, and Norton distributes them, for example, to Amazon, and they're actually available on from Ingram. Mm-hmm. So they are there,
so
and they're available,
but they're not being pushed.
Right.
So stores that don't want them aren't ordering them and then returning them, which is a big deal. I mean, depending upon the book,
a store,
you get a quarter of your books back, and you're like, well, that ruins everything.
A mainstream bookstore has to somehow be aware of it and want it.
Yeah.
And that bookstore is likely to buy it and not return it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think from here we can go in a lot of different directions. I know that there's one question that probably a lot of people in this room would want to ask all of you, despite whatever interesting, crinkles I'm interested in, which is, how do you find new books for publication, right? I think that's probably the number one question people want to know. If now that we have this panel of editors here in front of us, how do you find material, and what's the best way to get something in front of you? And maybe Tom, you can start.
Well, you know, we do get a lot of submissions. We might get like, it depends, different times. But we might get like 5 submissions a day, and I do look at all of those personally, and other people on staff do as well, but not as, I guess, consistently. And we do select stuff from there. It used to be the case that like there was nothing in the submission file that you would take. But that had, the level of the stuff coming in has been much better. I mean, we'll still get stuff that's like a Spider-Man tryout page. You know, like I still get that stuff.
I know, that letter you wrote me back was so mean.
I had to, well, that, you know, that's not true because, you know, I don't write back.
Even worse.
But also, you know, it's I think it's what you would expect. It's like we're trying to pay attention as much as possible to what's out there. So it's not just like going to shows like this, but looking on Instagram relentlessly, talking to your artists if there's somebody that they like, which a lot of times they just come to you. You don't have to say, hey guys, anybody you like? You know, going into comic stores if you're traveling, going into a store and just seeing what maybe is like the local stuff, or even just what stuff they're excited about.
Do you get a lot of submissions from agents?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are those more or less fruitful, or is it just makes no difference?
They are no more fruitful. I don't like them at all. I mean, but I mean, we get some great agented submissions, of course, and some of our artists have agents. I mean, nobody had agents at a point, right? It was just a guy. It was just the Hernandez brothers sending you a comic
There were
saying,
no agents.
these guys are mean. Let's see what they say about our comic.
In fact, in the 80s, Marvel and DC refused to deal with agents.
Yeah.
I mean, they were like, an artist would get an agent, they said, we're not talking to you.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. I'm not big on them either, but you know,
You will talk
sometimes
to them.
they're good. It depends. It's you know, it's on a person by person basis, like anything, I suppose. But
And Charlotte, how do you find work?
Abrams is technically a closed house, so we like get a lot of agented submissions. I'm probably not getting quite 5 a day, but probably 2, at least 2 a day from agents. And they're a mixed bag.
Can you just say what
Yeah.
closed house means for
Oh,
people who don't know?
It means don't just email me your stuff because I won't look at it. Unfortunately, it means that we only accept agented submissions. So I do have to talk to a lot of agents. But beyond that, I do a lot of scouting as someone who is an artist, was an artist. I am always, as you say, on the gram, searching for hashtags. You know, something like, you know, a couple days ago was Visible Women. Love that one. Love to be able to just scroll through Twitter, and find incredible people. But the other thing is talking to a lot of my friends, is talking to artists, talking to my designers, seeing who the people they went to art school with who now have a book and their book's amazing. Recently, I have actually pursued a couple of books that artists I like tweeted that the books were going on submission and had their agents email, and I actually emailed their agents and ended up at least acquiring one of those books, and it was a really great experience. So it all depends. Like you said, it's a very person by person basis, and you know, an introduction really helps. Like if someone knows someone and they know me, that usually will get my eyes on things. But yeah, it's really just trying to deal with the volume at this point because so many more people are making graphic novels now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even in the last 5 years, the increase has been exponential.
And so many agents are representing graphic novels that they never did before.
Yeah.
Robin, what's your experience? Because the thing is, like, I know, like, is first of all, is First Second also a closed house?
Yeah, I hadn't heard that term before. What we say is that we don't take unsolicited submissions, and an agented submission counts as a solicited. So, well, maybe we're using the term wrong because we definitely take submissions from agents. but we don't take submissions from strangers. I guess I don't.
Sorry.
Yeah,
All your
like.
friends are agents. Involving agents.
Yeah. Okay. We're a closed house. I'll start saying that.
You can take that one back.
I mean, how do you feel about that as someone who comes from the small press?
I mean, from a just practical standpoint, it's necessary. Like, I get like probably one submission, maybe two a day, and it takes a lot of time to look at them, and that's with only coming through agents and through folks we know. If it was like open to everybody, it just would be impossible for us to look at it all. And we couldn't. I mean, we publish a lot already. We have like literally hundreds of books in the pipeline. We can't publish much more than we're already doing. So we just wouldn't have the capacity. But yeah, so most of the submissions I see come through agents or through a author who's a friend of one of our authors or someone's recommended. Or sometimes another editor at a different house will send someone our way. And I like agents when they're nice. They're. I guess one pet peeve for me with agents is sometimes they send us stuff that's like, this isn't for first, second.
That kills me.
Like, have you ever seen us publish something like
that
this?
That would be almost all of the submissions from agents. They're
Some agents are more
routinely-
selective. There are not all agents.
Yeah.
Not all
They go
agents.
back to their author and tell them about how many different places they've submitted.
Yes.
That's right, Bill.
Oh.
That is exactly right.
Well, Gary, how about you? How about Panagraphics? You said there are 3 acquiring editors at Panagraphics.
Yeah, they're
Now,
basically-
you and Eric and who else?
Me and Eric and Conrad,
Conrad.
my son who's been working there for 7 years now. Apparently we're like a really open house.
I send people your way constantly. No, seriously.
To sleep on the floor. That open.
I mean, it's every way. I mean, we keep our ear to the ground. I mean, we go to small press conventions all through the year. We hit most, if not all of them. I usually come away from a small press convention with like a box or 2 of comics that I pick up. We sort of just keep track of what's, who's coming up. I'm sure that, that Eric monitors Instagram much more assiduously than I do. And we do get a lot of, we do get a lot of agented submissions, and most of them are lousy. But I work with agents quite a bit. I'd say probably 30% of the original graphic novels we publish are probably agented. And I don't mind. I mean, I usually like working with agents because they actually know what they're doing. And frankly, some artists, they'll ask for a 30% royalty or something, and you have to explain to them that, and agents know roughly what they can ask for, and they're professional, and usually they're good. I mean, the tiresome part is just getting submitted crap that has no bearing on what you publish whatsoever. And then I just send a polite, not interested.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, people come up to me at conventions and give me stuff, and we acquire, and we literally get probably 15 or 20 packages a week
Oh, wow.
of submissions.
Like you get
in the mail.
Do
in
you
the
not
mail.
have legal issues with that? Because we can't. Okay, maybe that's. Never mind.
We're kind of loose legally.
All right.
There was a time. This was probably a few years ago, but we had our pile of mailed in submissions, the place where it was put, and it was in our kitchen / mailing room, and I would walk through it every day, and the pile would never decrease. It would always it would always be the same pile, and so I wasn't quite sure who looked at this pile, and so finally I asked someone is someone looking at the submissions? And then I was told, yes, it's like, someone goes through that every week, and it's a new pile every week. And I thought it was like the same pile that was just sitting there for, forever.
Do you call it the slush pile? Because that's what I have heard it called.
Yeah,
Okay,
it is
just
a slush
FYI.
pile, right. And, once in a while, someone does go through these, and, usually it's like thrown away immediately. But once in a while, we do find something that's terrific. We got into a lot of trouble about, I don't know, it was like 6 or 7 years ago. Someone who's no longer working there, and not for this reason, but working at our marketing department, thought it would be kind of funny. We got we got like a new dumpster in the back of the office, and somebody thought it would be funny to tweet that, a photograph of that, and said, "This is our new submissions repository."
Oh,
Yeah.
No.
We
Yeah,
actually
that's the kind
asked
of response
people,
we got on
We
Twitter.
asked people not to send physical copies because they actually like get kind of lost. Like I lose them on my desk. Whereas if somebody sends me a PDF, then I just go through it.
Yeah.
Right then, and
yeah.
I go. I mean, I'm just right there on the computer, and I go through it, and I can tell if we're interested or not very quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you need to spend some time with it to see if you're really interested. But most of these, you can open up the email and go like, nope.
Yeah.
You know, and so 5, that is not a lot of my time in a day with 5 of those, because almost all 5 of those will be nopes.
Yeah, and are you like me, which is that you can usually know within 30 seconds if
Of
it's
course,
worth
yeah,
looking at?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's the ones that you're like, oh, what's going on here?
Yeah,
Like there's
yeah.
some that immediately like the art is appealing, and you go
There's
like,
something
okay, let me see what's
worth
happening,
looking at, yeah.
and you read it and you go like, not great. And then there's some where you go like, I don't love how this looks, but let me read a bit and see what they're getting at. So it's not totally visually, but it's often
Yeah.
but I mean, it's comics too. Like, it's rare that something is hideous in like every possible
yeah,
way, and then you're like, I can't
brilliant.
believe how good this is to read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will
I think
say, yeah, that first sentence, truly, and I feel a little bad, and sometimes the subject line of the email will influence my level of attention. But you really have to, we're getting so many emails, 5, at least 1 a day,
Yeah.
more likely 2 to 3. And sometimes in that day, I don't necessarily even have time to see them. I like tend to block off time to look at submissions because it's the only way I can make it happen. But it's really important to grab you immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, you get ones that start off with like, we've recorded a record album and we're hoping to make a movie, and we've got 18 comics in this series, and there's a group of 10 people who are writing, and you're like, I don't need to keep
Delete.
going. I don't need to keep going on this.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
no way.
Politely.
No, I mean, I hate to say it, but I do kind of dread seeing the agent emails because you know from the header what they are. And it's like, like 1 out of 50 might be worth looking at, but I feel like I'm compelled to open it and.
So do you not have agents you work with over and over and over again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
do.
we have like
Occasionally.
I mean, we work with a lot of agents at First Second, but we might have like 5 that we are working on like many books with them. So they know us, we know them, and they tend to not send us stuff that has nothing to do with First Second. I think lately it's been like the new agents who are just getting into graphic novels, and they're sending it everywhere. And they're saying it's like this, and it's like, it's not like this. It's not. It's yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask, just as like a general point of information, there's like a lot. I mean, I know there's a lot of proprietary information, and if you can't say, that's fine. But one of the things we kind of talked in general about like the size of each company's line. There have been some references to like print run numbers as well. I'm kind of wondering if you're able to give us kind of like a ballpark sense of maybe like floor and ceiling, like what your print runs are like. Is that something that you're able to do?
I think I can.
What?
Oh, I hope I can. I mean, I think sometimes we print a hardcover and a paperback at the same time. So the hardcover printing would be much lower because our paperback market is larger. So on the small end, I mean, we might print so it was 5,000, but then for like a super big book, like we have this series called Investigators, which you guys in this room might not be familiar with it, but if you have like an 8-year-old in your life, they might. It's like it's very popular, and so like a first printing for Investigators, we could do like 125,000, and that's pretty high for us. Like that is a rare thing.
Can you imagine
That's
selling
high
that
for
many
me.
graphic novels? Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that would be the height. Like that's when we like it's a sure bet.
Yeah.
Like it's the next Gene Yang thing, or it's the next Investigators, or like we know it's going to sell, and we know we need to have a lot in stock when it debuts. So yeah, it really depends on the books. Like if we have like, there's a lot fewer investigators than like folks that are on the smaller end of the range.
Yeah. Tom, are you able to say anything along those lines?
Oh yeah. We try for the floor to be like 4,000, and so that means there are books that don't sell that. There are books that don't make that at all, right? But that's usually what we try for. That's like what we forecast for, and then it can be 50,000 typically. I don't think we tend to print higher than that for anything. But we talked about Ducks earlier, and that was a book that was probably like 50, but then within a couple of weeks, we probably had second and third printings going.
Yeah, to be clear, we're talking about first printings.
Yeah.
So.
And like the upcoming Jillian and Mariko book would also be at that high level, I would guess, if not higher.
Yeah.
Approximately, give or take.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah. Save it for the trades. Gary, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's going to be kind of meaningless because we can print anywhere between. I mean, we don't want to print fewer than 2. 2,500 is probably as low as you want to get. Otherwise, a few books. But we can print anywhere from 2,500 to 40,000, 50,000. I don't think we've ever printed 125,000 of a first printing of a book.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it's an enormous range.
Yeah.
And and I mean, we go through a lot of work to try to figure out the print run, because you don't want books sitting in the warehouse never selling.
It
And you
costs
don't want to
money.
go back to
It's
print.
very
I mean,
bad.
It's this incredible balancing act between printing too few and printing too many. And of course, you don't want to, as they always tell you, leave money on the table. You don't want to sell out within 2 months and go, shit, I should have printed another 1,000 copies.
Sure.
So it's
really
really
tough.
tough.
Yeah, and I think what probably, like a lot of people looking at book publishing from the outside are probably not aware of the kinds of steps that you go through even when you're deciding, should we buy this book? How much should we offer for it? What are we going to set the print run at? And a lot of that has to do with identifying comparable titles, looking them up on BookScan, seeing what they sold, running what's called P&L spreadsheets, right? Profit and loss.
Yeah,
Do
we
you
don't
do
do
that,
that.
Gary?
No.
You don't do that? What? How do you know?
Oh my god.
We use our gut.
Oh my God.
We've never.
I think that's actually better because this is a P&L spreadsheet is basically like a dumb AI that only knows basic algebra, and you basically put in the numbers of a comparable title sold. You divide up your total overhead for everything, including electricity and how much you pay for catering and everything. Every book has to carry a slice of that, right? And then you put how much you think it's going to sell.
I have a question for Charlotte and Robin. So you do go through a P&L. Does everyone know what a P&L is? Profit and loss.
Profit and loss. It's a spreadsheet, basically.
So you do this,
Yes.
and I assume you have to do this.
Yes.
Does it work? I mean, does it at the end of the day? Does it actually make any
We
difference?
do it as well.
It only
I'm
works.
so disappointed.
We forecast the book. There's some fixed costs.
When you do
we all
that.
know. We all can say well, we're paying this for the translation.
Yeah.
We're paying.
No, you know what your
we want
costs
to
are.
pay this
Right.
for an advance.
I could do it if I wanted to.
He's not
know
saying he's
that.
not capable.
So there's a lot
No,
of
I'm
fixed costs.
constitutionally incapable.
And then there's parts that you are guessing, but having all those fixed costs lined up are they're tremendously helpful. And you can pay the
at what
artist
stage
more,
do you
right?
do
That's
this?
the thing.
At what stage do you do that?
Acquisition.
I do that
Pre-acquisition.
before pre-acquisition.
Yeah.
Yes.
Before you acquire a book?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I also meant that as
We're
an
very,
acquisition.
we're very slow with acquiring books. It almost never happens. I'll get something and I'm like, yeah, this is great and I want this. It is very rare that I will say that, be able to do that right away.
Okay.
It could be a couple of weeks.
We're very fast
and that's
at
just what we
acquiring
do.
books.
But that's the kind of thing is that
It's a great book.
we're in
Buy it.
we're in a place where we can kind of be like, they're gonna have to wait a couple of weeks while we figure this out.
Sure.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
like-
I mean, you're not under pressure. You can take your
Yeah,
time.
I mean,
sure.
and but then there's sometimes where we go like, yeah, okay, we're offering today. This is good, and you know, I mean, that's the kind of book that you know will really sell too, right? Like, I can't believe this one came in. People are really into this right now, and this is a great version of this.
Absolutely.
And that's where you like preempt a book, which means you buy it before anyone else can put an offer in or before an auction can happen. If you
Yeah.
love it so
Yeah.
much.
We actually tell agents that we won't bid on books.
Oh, okay.
We won't enter into bids.
Unless you can just.
They bring it to us, and then we say yes or no, and that's it. We will not.
Do you never do auctions?
We do not.
Wow, I'm so jealous.
Me too. I hate auctions.
I hate auctions. Auctions are the
Can you
worst.
explain what you're talking about for people who aren't sure?
Sure. So when an agent sends a book to you, they're probably also sending it to other editors at other houses, and often it's about a 2-week process, I think, for sort of the average book for me to run my P&L. If I like it, I bring it to my editorial meeting. They tell me if they like it, and then I have to bring it to our pub board after our sales and marketing team has reviewed my P&L and told me if they think that my numbers are accurate. And sometimes the news is great and they say, no, we think you can sell more, and sometimes it's devastating and they shoot you down. But after that point, the agent will often set a deadline and have an auction between all the different publishing houses, and they will send you rules. Auction rules.
They're always different.
We're killing you with these horrible realities of our lives
It's my
here.
worst nightmare.
It is also my worst nightmare. Want to take it from here, Robin, please.
Oh yeah, and just like, depending on the rules, like sometimes
You're
it could
tag
be
teaming.
a best bids auction, or like sometimes has several rounds, but
A best bids auction is where everybody just puts in like their top, right? And that's
Yeah.
it. And then so you don't get to fight it out afterward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can also include like your marketing plan and stuff.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that, too.
You-
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean who's offering the most money either.
But sometimes there's several rounds, like, oh, you're the second on the first round. Do you want to improve your, or you're at the bottom, like, or you didn't make it to the next round. It's very stress-inducing.
Yeah, and I think it sounds really good for the artist. When we describe this, you're like, oh, I might get like 4 times the amount, that I could have got initially. But it doesn't mean anything's going to really happen for you in the future. Like, it doesn't mean that you have a home. And that's one of the things, that's why we just decided, like, well, look, we want to work with an artist because we actually want to create a home, and we want to do more books with them. And we don't want to go through this every time we want to do a book with them. And, I mean, we know, like, if you get picked up, like, by a major New York house that bid a lot of money for you, and your book flops, you're not doing your next book with them. And then, so it's just like, so that's ugly for you. Like, you got, and we've heard these stories. Like, you got your $50,000, like, advance on this book that you did, and then it flops, and then you got nothing. That's the thing. And I'm not going to offer you $50,000 because I've figured out that $20,000 is what I can afford, like, morally.
That's the cost of your morals?
That in my company, like, I'm not putting other books in jeopardy. I'm not, like, underpaying my employees to be able to, give you too much money for this book or whatever. I think we all like getting a big fat check, but it works out for the agent, because the agent will always find somebody else to sell, like a big book. So they'll always get their paycheck. And if you're no longer useful to the agent, oh well, there's somebody else who will come along.
Yeah, and the other thing about following the money, and I have heard some horror stories from folks I've worked with, is when they went with the house that offered them the most because it made them feel the most wanted, and instead of, they said, I got the money, but I didn't go with the editor that I had the best connection with, or the things I learned about the house. They'd never done a graphic novel before, but they offered me $100,000, and so I went with it, and it was it was a nightmare. And so it's really, I think there's some gut instinct that people could be trusting a little bit more. But yeah, auctions are a nightmare. They're the worst.
If Gary signs your book, Gary's not going anywhere. Like, he's going to be there when your book comes out, and he's going to be there 2 years later when you have another book or whatever. Like, that's also a thing, is that, like, you know, I could say most of us are probably pretty stable. I mean, I've been in the same job for 20 years. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be there if I sign your book for your next book. And that's a big deal because that is not necessarily the case, you know, with a house that hasn't done a graphic novel before.
We are way over time. I could probably talk for another half hour, but I saw you had your hand up. Did you? Yeah, what did you want to
I
add?
don't really see the point next option because from the point of the artist, how does it work? Like, I would die for launching a book with any of you, and if I discovered that my agent is just like bidding in, making a giant
They consult you. They're
that's
always
up to you.
consulting with
Yeah,
you.
it's your choice.
Well, a good agent will
This
consult.
it's like,
Fair enough.
It still happens like.
But if you publish with any of us, then it makes sense you would get the most, you would want the biggest advance, right?
Yeah, but I also don't want to be the boring person that makes people like weeks bid for, because just like Tom said, it's like they will do this once, but not 3 times, 4 times, you know.
Well, this attitude is probably why you're not an agent.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was curious, what percentage of your sales are happening through dine-in comic shops? What percentage are happening physical, and what's happening on Amazon? How would you break
Do you
that
guys know
down?
that? We're just editors.
Comic shops is, I mean, it's generally pretty low, but I can't even say what it is anymore. 10? Could be 5. I mean, it's mostly
I would have thought it
bookstores.
was mostly comic.
No, not at all. No, comic
Well,
shops.
comic shops
Comic
aren't
shops.
very diverse. I mean, they're serving that Wednesday.
There's a lot of great comic shops, and there are a lot of way better comic shops than there were like in the 80s. Even though there were a lot of comic shops in the 80s, like you can actually, they're well lit and they're nicely, you know, organized and everything, and they're pretty amazing. They're absolutely amazing. Yes, they can take credit cards. But comic shops. They order through Diamond, and it's that's non-returnable, right? I mean, they can order other ways.
Well,
Some
I was
ones
going to say, a
do.
lot of the ones that order books order through them
Why
anyway.
you're not going to order a
Because they're returnable.
$50
Yeah,
graphic
yeah.
novel non-returnable? So you're going to order that book because a customer specifically said, "I will buy that book from you," and maybe even put down a down payment on it.
The one question I think is worth addressing that came up too is Amazon like your number one retail outlet at this point?
Amazon is a huge. We do get a pie chart at our, like as a publishing group. Do you get a pie chart?
Yeah, we got a pie chart.
And Amazon
Tell me
is
about
like,
the pie chart.
well, it's like Amazon, and then it's like Barnes. It's like independent bookstores, which is a very small, and then like Barnes and Nobles and like the distributors, and like then like Target and stuff like that. But Amazon is a big slice.
Yeah, so you've got like mass market, which is like which is like Target and Walmart, and then you've got also like the school and library market. Is that Ingram? I can't remember
so.
who distributes that, but it's all these pieces of the pie, but Amazon is by far.
Well, 'cause I always noticed that the same book is way cheaper on Amazon.
Yeah, everyone else is not accepting.
That's
We
a
know
whole other-
too.
that's a whole other topic.
That's because Amazon discounts it themselves. They have the right to do that.
They're for us. They're not by far the biggest, and it depends on the book.
Creative.
Yeah, I am curious, for those of us who have submitted our work to a number of publishers and gotten the feedback that this is brilliant and we don't know what to do with it, is there, where can us brilliant, in quotes, artists find feedback that will help us like form our brilliance into more marketable work?
I would say ask for feedback
Yeah.
in that email exchange, because
That's permissible?
yeah, I think it's permissible to ask.
Yeah.
I don't give feedback. I don't, except for like kind of.
You can ask, I don't do it.
I know. Let me finish my sentence. I don't give feedback unless I'm asked, except for like in a very general sense, like,
Because that's a loser's game.
because like,
You'll just make people angry. at
yeah,
you.
like this. I mean,
Just
probably
turn it
think.
down. Don't give them details
Yeah,
on why
if
they
you
should
could,
hate
like maybe
you.
they
Just let
don't
them
want to
flat
hear.
out hate
Yeah,
you.
maybe they don't want to hear why it's not for us. But I just say, you know, I'm sorry to say this isn't a perfect fit. And if they want to come back and say, could you give me some feedback? Then I would. But unless they ask for it, I'm not gonna. I expect
And I
they're
never
gonna
get
hear
that
it.
question. I never get someone
I've
coming
gotten
back.
it
I
like
didn't
twice
know
or something.
we were allowed to ask that, so that's
But-
really-
well,
Well, and that goes to Charlotte's point too, that sometimes other editors that rejected books have referred books to her. So maybe, that's another thing too, like, do you think there's a house where I should, I mean, if you're talking to like a humane editor, they're not only looking at their self-interest as a corporate unit.
I'm not taking these rejections personally, but it's like I'd like to try and revamp the book so that it would be
And
sellable.
you have an agent, right?
Huh?
You have an agent, don't you?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, that's kind of it's a non-foreign question because if the book is brilliant, I'll publish it. I mean, I won't say, oh, you have to do this and that to make it more publishable. I mean, I would just publish it. I don't have pie charts and,
I mean,
Yeah, if your book is
that's
brilliant
the
and we
same
say
for
you
me.
can't publish it, go to Gary.
yeah. But,
I mean, that's kind of, I don't really tell people you need to do this and this and this, and
No.
then I will publish your book.
no.
I'm not interested in that. Like, I'm not trying to meet a market. I'm trying to
But that almost
publish
never
artists
works.
that I like.
I don't see how that can work anyway. I mean, I just don't. I mean, I guess if you're publishing some highly commercial
It
thing.
can if you're
that-
meeting markets, right? But that's never been our publishing model,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
to meet a market.
Yeah.
You just
Well,
want to
I
say,
think-
like,
yeah.
that's a cartoonist people should see. People may find it flawed. I may find some things flawed, but I like a lot of what's happening here. Get it
Yeah,
out.
to me, that's what's very frustrating. Like, because I think what's been really great about this panel is you have people with a lot of really diverse experiences, and Robin and Charlotte are working for publishing houses that are part of larger multinational conglomerate corporations. Tom and Gary are independent publishing, but are sort of competing at that same retail level. To me, the thing that's always very frustrating about corporate book publishing is what you were describing, Charlotte, which is that the marketing department can sort of shoot things down, because having been on the other side of working on books, let's just say a lot of people have had horrible experiences with book publicists and book marketing plans or lack of plans that are basically just like the same rote, press release going out to the same rote list of reviewers, and we did everything we can and this is it. I've never heard more received wisdom than I've heard in book publishing, which is that, oh, this doesn't work, or that doesn't sell, or this, and it's kind of like, but you don't often hear publishers say like, oh, we didn't really do a good job marketing that book. And even though you see it happen all the time, so anyway, but I think this has all been so interesting. The number one thing I want to thank is all of our panelists. That was just a pie chart. So I want to thank all of our panelists, not just for being here, but for also, I think, being honest and sharing a lot today. So please, and I want to thank everyone who stuck around a big 25 minutes. Thank you so much.